think all these messages about get out the vote and volunteer are a great lead in for our main project for today, which is a training organized by Open Progress. And that was really originated with vote.org, which is one of Election Protection's 100 partners that they have working on the local level at all times. So I would like to introduce Chris Donato. He's the Senior Digital Organizer of Open Progress, who will be leading our training, and his colleague, Jamie Clayton, the Volunteer Activation Associate, who will be answering all of your questions in chat. So if you have a question on anything Chris is teaching us, just put it in chat and Jamie will be there to answer. So over to you, Chris.
Awesome. Therese, thank you so much. It has been wonderful to work with you and Marion over the last couple of weeks. And thank you so much for inviting us in here to work with all these amazing volunteers. I can't get over that there's 59 people here tonight. Like, that is absolutely fantastic to see so many people dedicated to such an important cause. Those videos were really, really inspiring. Like, it is absolutely critical that not only everybody casts their ballot, but everybody knows that how important it is to vote, make their voice heard, and get involved in civil society and civic participation. Democracy is not a passive sport. We all need to get out there and ensure that our voices are heard, no matter where we are, where we live, or what we think of our current districts being, safe or unsafe or swing. We all need to vote no matter what. So I think that was really, really great to hear. And I think it was really awesome to see, especially younger people, my generation and those younger than me, really getting pushed to get involved. So the way I wanted to run through everything tonight was I first wanted to talk a little bit at first about our partnership with vote.org and what that looks like. I'll tend to take probably most of the time to actually jump into our texting software, which is called TextOut. That is where all of these conversations live and where you can utilize our software to actually engage with people in a variety of different states to encourage them to sign up to vote, whether it's to help them vote by mail or in some cases help update their registration. It's going to be a big campaign that we're rolling out with them. And we are really excited to get it started. And then at the end, Jamie and myself will be saving some time to answer any major questions that everybody has. But if you have questions as we move through, Jamie, it will be kind of covering the chat. So she'll be able to answer any questions via chat in real time. But if she ever needs to ping me when I start to get on a roll, she can always come off and grab my attention. She knows that I am a native to the Northeast, so I tend to speak very quickly and sometimes can get a little off track. So it's always nice to have that check right there, just to keep me totally on our objective and not rolling too far over time. Our partnership with vote.org this year has been a little bit different than what we initially anticipated. We started working with them in 2018, primarily to help people with tracking down their registration, updating their registrations, and helping people ensure, no matter what state they lived in, that they knew where their polling place was and how to cast their ballot. In a number of states, that included things like early voting, absentee requirements. Unfortunately, in a number of states, that also meant meeting several requirements, like bringing a certain kind of photo ID. There were a variety of different campaigns that rolled through that way. This year, because of the pandemic and a lot of the issues that we've had around that impacting our civil discourse, their major initiative has been vote by mail. So all vote.org's outreach efforts and everything they do is 100% nonpartisan. They do not have any political bend, either ideologically or politically. Their goal is just to ensure that no matter who people are or where they live, they go out, cast their ballots, and make their voices heard. So their vote by mail initiatives, so far at least, have been primarily focused in a number of states across the country, ranging from Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. We did some work in Georgia earlier. There's a variety of different states that they work in. The way that the campaigns typically work in our partnership with them is that they'll work hand in hand with our team to help pre-write some scripts and some potential responses to send. We'll work with them to make sure everything gets set up, build the actual campaign, and that campaign itself will live within our texting software. That way volunteers can log in, they can select the campaign they want to text in, they can go in, request text, and engage in the conversations all in one location. The goal of which, from an ease of volunteering, is to really kind of have a one-stop shop location where people can have the autonomy to jump in and volunteer on a variety of different campaigns, really on their own schedule. We didn't realize how unique that was going to be with this year, considering that, like, people jumping in when they have a free hour or two has been made, a little bit more in flux given the current pandemic situation. But it's been having the ability for people to get involved no matter where they are when they can, has always been kind of the focus of ours, to really ease that ability for people to get involved. If you have a spare hour, spare half hour, it's a great way to be able to jump in on your own time. The really great thing about these campaigns too is that their targeted lists are not just all voters in a particular state. Vote.org knows that we're trying to reach out to, say, all 5 million plus eligible voters in Georgia, or say it's got to be over 15 million eligible voters in Texas. Is probably not feasible. Their initiatives have then been a little bit more micro-targeted. So when Vote.org pulls the lists that they give to us, they're doing so with a certain targeted demographic in mind. And that demographic has typically been those who have had the most barriers put up to them casting ballots or making their voices heard. In this case, this year, it has primarily been young voters, and they classify that as voters under the age of 35, which I think technically is the high end of millennial. I'm not 100% sure of that, but I'm pretty sure that's where it ends, because I was born in '92 and I'm like kind of in the middle end of millennial, but it's somewhere around there. So young voters are a huge initiative for them because they want to make sure that young voters can cast their ballots and cast them effectively. The other main group that they've been reaching out to are voters of color, specifically voters of color in a number of these particular states, a lot of which have had barriers to voting instituted, whether that was the form of photo ID, whether that was the form of voter rolls being purged, whether that had to do with consolidating polling places. There have been a lot of voting restrictions enacted across the country in recent years. So the objective of reaching out to voters of color is to help them vote safely and help them to vote and make sure that that people are not disenfranchised. One of their goals is Florida has been a big targeted state for them in the past, and I'm hoping that that is going to be a big state that they focus on in the future, because that state, especially now that that major initiative passed in 2018 that re-enfranchised a number of people in that state, I'm really hoping that we'll be doing a lot of work there to help people get registered. But we'll have some more information on their campaign soon. One last thing to note about the programs themselves is that as soon as we get lists from Vote.org, we can build the programs and then make them accessible to everybody. As of today, we don't have anything open right now, but we are expecting some very, very soon. As soon as we do, myself and Jamie will be sure to reach out and let everybody know. That way you're not just always jumping back in here and looking and seeing empty programs. That way you'll get kind of an activation email to know when to jump in, what campaigns there are, and get a little bit of a background too. With that, I am going to share my screen and give you all the grand tour of what TextOut looks like. Can everyone see my screen okay? Should be a big white background with TextOut in the middle. I'm just going to check the checks. I'm assuming that's where. Perfect. All right. So the first thing I want to highlight, that although this is a peer-to-peer texting software, you notice that I am using this on my computer. TextOut can be utilized on a computer, tablet, or mobile phone. It is entirely up to you what medium you'd like to utilize. I prefer having it on a computer because it makes my screen as big as possible so I can read the conversations more effectively. It also allows me to have up other tabs so that if I need to reach out to somebody with questions or email somebody, it makes it a little bit easier. At least for me, that's preferable, though I know some people who swear that using it on their phone is better. I personally recommend the computer, but it's entirely up to you. As a means of software, you'll always access it via a browser window. You'll never use it as an app, which also makes it a little bit easier to use. So if you do use TextOut on your phone, it's just you go to whatever browser you typically use to surf on your smartphone, and then just go to the same web address. When you're signing up for TextOut, it goes back to that self-service model that we've always tried to implement. You're not going to need anything from me or anything from staff in terms of activation codes to get started. As soon as you get this link, which should be made available after this call or has been made available beforehand, it is literally the link to join TextOut. You will click on this link here, I'm brand new, and then you will literally just create your own account. So you just put in your name, your email, your phone number, password of your choice, just like you're signing up for Netflix or any other online provider. You'll click the button to let everybody know you're not a robot, just like everything else. And then we did just institute a privacy policy as well, which you are welcome to read through and make sure everything looks good. And then once you're ready, you can hit submit and you're ready to go. There is pretty much no delay between setting up your profile and being able to jump in. In order to jump in, you just go back to that same home screen and click on the other button of I've used TextOut before. And then you just log in, and there's a nice little forgot password link. So just in case you ever forget your password like I do once every 2 weeks, you can always reset it super easily, like resetting it to your email. Once you log in, this is where things can get slightly confusing because it's going to open up to a number of different workspaces. For all of the vote.org texts in our nonpartisan 501c3 programs, you're going to want to scroll down this page. So I'm going to move this so everybody can see, but I've been scrolling this whole time, and it's going to be within the Turnout Troop workspace. When you all accept the link to join TextOut, the Turnout Troop workspace is going to look like this, and it's going to have a blue Enter Workspace button, while other workspaces are going to have this green Join button. That's going to be the distinction and the way to remind you that you're always going to want to enter the Turnout Troop workspace. So always look for that name, look for this logo, look for that 501c3 marking, and then you can enter the workspace there, and that's where all of these programs live. And if you're ever confused about where to go, you can always email in, but cannot stress enough, always look for that Turnout Troop, always look for that logo, and always cross-check with that 501c3. Once you click Enter Workspace, that's where all these campaigns are going to live. So once you log in, it's going to look like this. It's going to have a nice big screen here with programs listed over here on the left-hand side. They're mostly going to be marked with vote.org and then the state. So that's how we know which one they are. Some of them might have a little bit more information like VBM Education Young Voters. That basically just stands for Vote by Mail Education, and then young voters being the demographic that that campaign is targeting. Some of them are going to be more detailed than others, but for the most part, they're either going to fall into one of those two categories, either young voters under 35 or voters of color, both younger and over the age of 35. All active campaigns will always be listed here. You can see here that these programs are 100% completed. That means that there are no more additional text to send. All the conversations and all the voters within these campaigns have been reached out to. They've been texted either by myself, another volunteer, or another staff member. If you have conversations that are ready to reply, like voters that are ready to get back to you, you'll see that here with that red circle with the number of conversations that are ready. Otherwise, the campaign will look like this, like Pennsylvania does, where it will show the number of conversations that you've sent, as well as the number of conversations you've had. So it's a nice way to be able to keep track of how many messages you've sent, how many voters you've talked to, and you can always go back in and see and revisit these conversations as well. You don't have to re-engage with completed conversations, but it does give you a nice way to keep track of your own progress, how many texts you've sent, how many people you've engaged with. It's a really cool way to be able to have that bit of information as well that you can always come back and check. If a campaign is open and available for texting, there will be a green open button located right above the particular campaign. It'll also have a not 100% completed level as well. If a campaign is open and available for texting, you are able to go in there and request text in it. We volunteers can request text in any program if it's open. And the only parameters that we really have in terms of when programs are open or closed are typically when we're trying to open it up to larger groups or when we have texting available. And the only times we absolutely cannot send messages is when it's outside of quiet hour, or I should say within quiet hours. So the legal times that we can contact voters are within canvassing hours. So from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. in the time zone of each respective program. So I can respond to these voters in Georgia anytime between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern time, whereas in Arizona, as of now, I think they're technically in, I want to say they're in Pacific time. I always forget with Arizona because they don't go by the time zones. So I can never forget if right now they're in Mountain or Pacific, but let's just say they're in Mountain. So I could respond to these Arizona voters between 11 a.m. and 11 p.m. Eastern time, or 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Mountain time. You will not be able to send any messages to voters outside of quiet hours. The campaign will go dark. You might get responses that come in, but you won't be able to respond to them until the next day. And I'll show you all how that all looks like and how all of that interfaces. The reason, though, that we're able to have people volunteer from all over the country and still be able to request text in these programs is through the other part of this home screen, which is this feedback section. So I don't have any feedback items yet, but the feedback annotates the way that we can communicate with volunteers within TextOut as a software. So whenever volunteers request messages to send, they're reviewed by a member of our volunteer moderating team. That team has been with us for a number of years. They've worked on a variety of different campaigns, and their goal is to be able to help volunteers improve their texting skills, improve their ability to engage and converse with voters, and get the most out of every single conversation. Because if we manage to reach out to one of these voters and they respond to us, they're responding, a lot of times about voting questions. They might, want to be able to sign up to vote by mail. They might have to update their registration. There might be issues with early voting. They might have a concern. These are all things that we want to be able to respond to because these are real concerns that may inhibit their ability to cast their ballot or weigh in the political process this year. So the goal of the feedback is to be able to help people improve. I was not a perfect texter when I started. I got quite a bit of feedback, and that is totally okay. We do not expect perfection. We do not want perfection, or at least not at the start. Obviously, we all want perfection, but it's not always attainable. The goal is to always go into it with the mindset that we can always be better. How can I make one conversation better? And how can I continually improve as an activist and as someone who wants to continue to improve the political process? So that feedback will happen every time that you request text. It's just a moderator going through some of your conversations to provide helpful support. Whenever you see that you get the notification that says you have new feedback to review, it will always be here on that homepage alongside all of the active programs. But now comes the fun part. Now comes the part where I actually get to jump into one of these programs and show you what the interface looks like. So if I was to click here on Georgia, because I have replies ready to send, one thing I love to see is that when I jump into this screen or jump into the program, the first thing that comes up, I'm actually going to minimize this here, throw that to the side. I love seeing this screen that shows all the other volunteers that are active in this. It's a really cool way, at least in my view, to really show that solidarity and show that no matter where we are, and especially in these times where, we can feel isolated and really, set aside from the political process and not being able to participate as much as we'd want to in civic society for a variety of reasons, but obviously the pandemic being the big one. This is a really great way to see how many other people are taking that step and working in these particular campaigns, volunteering their time and ensuring that every single person has the ability to cast their ballot safely this year. But when you're ready to take that jump, you click that Start Texting button, and it takes you to the main interface screen. So every campaign that you will see within TextOut will look like this. On the left-hand side are going to be the conversations that are ready to respond to. And on the right-hand side here, it's a little hard to see, but you'll see them in just a second. You'll be able to see all the different types of responses that are pre-built by us that you can send to the voters when they get back to you. When I said that our campaign team was helping to work with vote.org to build these scripts and build these responses, they go above and beyond. They have built scripts and potential responses for literally every single kind of response that a voter can send you. And I mean every single one. There is really nothing that they haven't been able to account for, which is really spectacular. And that's because we want to make sure that every volunteer who texts with us has every tool at their disposal to be able to know what responses to send. But even then, we want to make sure that every volunteer has a background and has an idea of what responses to send and when. You know, because this response here that says, yes, already requested plus tripler can be very confusing to a lot of people. So how do you know what responses to send at what times? Well, we also account for that. If you look up here in the top right-hand corner, there's a blue circle with a white eye. Kind of looks like the information button at an airport. If you click on that, it will bring up this screen here, which is called our README. And the best way to think about the README is to think about it as the campaign background. You know, this is the, About Me section on someone's LinkedIn page. It is the About Me section on a website. This is the background as to what the program is and who we are reaching out to. So we're texting on behalf of Vote.org in Georgia. None of this program is partisan or on behalf of any candidate. It'll talk a little bit about what they're doing and then give you a link to Vote.org in case you need it. But thankfully, Vote.org has their website in their name, so they're kind of a unique case. But we want to make sure that people know where they can get the resources they need. And this document here is probably the most important. This is what we call our workflow. But if anybody's done political activism before, you'll probably recognize it by a different name, like a canvassing or phone banking script. It really is a flowchart that is designed to be able to tell you and inform you about what response to send based on the response you get from the voter. So you can see up here, this is what that first message is sent to those voters. It'll typically end with a question. In all of these Vote.org campaigns, typically it will end with, will you sign up to vote by mail? But some of them might be like, if it's a voter registration update campaign, it would have a little bit of a different ending here. But either way, these initial texts will always end with a question designing to prompt the voter to respond. When the voter responds, they can respond in a variety of ways. Like they can say, yes, I'd love to sign up to vote by mail. Someone can say like, yes, I've already requested my mail-in ballot. Someone can say, no, I don't want to vote by mail. Someone can say, I always vote in person and I'm going to wear my mask and I'm going to stay 6 feet apart from everybody. Great. Someone can say, I don't know, like I've thought about voting by mail. Maybe I don't know. Someone can, and then you might get somebody who say that, voting by mail is terrible and should never be a thing. So sometimes those people exist too, unfortunately. Either way, the goal of which is to be able to provide that roadmap. Now, obviously not every voter is going to respond with one of those 6, but those are primarily the ones that will continue the conversations and show you what response to send based on whatever that voter responds with. So instead of having to click back to that blue circle every time to keep getting to this document, there's 2 hyperlinks right above it and below it. And if I click on one of those, they will open up the workflow into a separate tab if you're on a computer or a tablet. So now I can just jump between TextOut in one tab up here or back to the workflow so I can easily access it whenever I'm moving through. One of the best parts about peer-to-peer texting is that unlike phone banking or canvassing or other forms of contacting voters, is that there's really no time limit. We obviously want to be able to respond to voters as fast as possible, but sometimes that's not feasible. Sometimes voters, don't get back to us for a number of days. Sometimes voters respond later. Sometimes people take an hour, 20 minutes, to respond. That is totally okay. Peer-to-peer texting does not require that immediate, instantaneous response that having somebody on the phone or being on somebody's, front porch entails. So you can take your time, you can be methodical, and if necessary, you can ask questions and be able to get that support you need to know that when you send that response to that voter, you're sending the correct one. So now comes the actual responses. So the conversations that are ready to reply are always going to come up on the left-hand side of your screen. Whenever you send a response to a voter, they will move into your completed tab automatically. For the completed conversations, you can always go through to see conversations you've had before, though you do not need to ever follow up with them. If, say, Brian, for example, was to text me back, he would then move into my ready responses automatically. So we do not need to go through the completeds, but they're nice to have in case you ever want to see your successes, or if I want to see like, hey, I got Brian to sign up to vote by mail. That's really cool. I can have access to that, but I don't have to actually go in here and follow up. So now it's time to see this in action. Or actually, I should say first, the initial text that's sent to the voter, the one that says, hi voter, I'm volunteer, it'll auto-populate your name. A volunteer with vote.org, all voters in Georgia may request a ballot to vote by mail. Will you sign up to vote by mail this year? That initial text is requested up here in the top right or top left-hand corner. If this program was open and available for texting, there would be a big green request text button up there. Unfortunately, since there are no texts to send, I can't show you that, but it is big and green and very, very hard to miss. There will also be no conversations that are ready to reply. So you really can't miss it in terms of getting started. But I do want to let you know that it would be there in the top left. But unfortunately, since we don't have the campaign open, it's not there. But yeah, now comes time to respond. Nice thing about these vote.org campaigns, they're typically very simple workflows. I've seen some of these scripts that look like a science experiment. I'm just like, that's a lot of arrows. I don't know if I can follow that. This one is pretty straightforward, which is really nice. So this person, very straightforward, succinct response to the will you send them to vote by mail this year? They responded with no. So fair enough. My goal was not to convince them. My goal was not to persuade them. My goal was to send the response that vote.org, their legal team, and our team have crafted as a response. So to that, there's a response that says if they say no, I click on that because that is what the workflow says. I go back. You can see once I've clicked on that response, it auto-populates both the text and it applies this blue data tag. That blue data tag is important because that's what vote.org can use to easily see the results of their program. They can see how many people are signing up. They can see what the response rates are. It's really, really cool to have all of this already built into the software so you don't have to record data in different places. Once I hit this big green send button, it's off. You can see Marisol has moved out of my contacts. They have now moved into my completed tab, so I do not need to respond to them again. And it automatically moves me up to the next person to engage with. I can jump between these too. You don't have to respond to them in order. It's really up to you how you want to best engage. If Marisol was to text me back, they will come back into my Ready tab. I'm going to start off now with Anthony. So if you will sometimes get wrong numbers, vote.org will pull their data from a number of different locations. Sometimes wrong numbers are a thing. That does happen. To respond to a wrong number, if you go to the responses over here, there's a wrong number tab. And if you click on that, it brings up a bunch of wrong number responses. So if I click on that wrong number general, because that is what the workflow says, it says to follow or to click wrong number at the top of the box in the text out screen. And the slide thing is blocking it, but it says to send the correct or wrong number response, which is the one that asks if they are registered to vote in Georgia. So I can hit send, and that has moved them out as well. If I want to check on the conversation, you can also see that that automatically marks it as a wrong number as well. So there's no other place that you have to enter any data for these particular campaigns. It is all logged within the software. So that's a really convenient way to keep track of that as well. Sometimes we'll get things like this. I love when people send me emojis because I'm the world's worst millennial and don't understand what half of them mean. So whenever somebody sends me things, I'm just like, I have absolutely no idea. But my personal favorite are people who text back with like the iPhone's ability to like send things with effects. So like somebody will send a text back and then like in parentheses, it'll say like sent with gentle effect. I'm like, I have no idea what that means. Or like sent with echo effect. I'm like, I really just, I clearly just do not know how to use technology, which is, you know, understandable, or shouldn't be because, you know, I'm in my 20s, but I digress. This person again said the same thing, but they're slightly angrier about apparently wanting to vote by mail or me asking them to vote by mail. So looking at the workflow, this is something where I probably have to make a judgment call. So are they somebody who seem like they're opposed to voting by mail because of those, I'm assuming, angry looking emojis? Or based on their first answer of no, should I send them the no response? So in this particular case, I can do one of two things. I can go with my gut and send the no response, since it's pretty straightforward, and it does give them the opportunity if they choose to, or I can go up to this search bar up here and I can see what the opposed response is. So if I search opposed, you can see it's a much more straightforward, you know, thanks for letting me know, you know, have a good day. Personally, from my perspective, I think it's better if I send the ballot requested no response, because it still gives them that opportunity if they so choose to, but it's going to mark them basically the same way. The other important thing to note with a conversation like this is that this is a very good opportunity, if you wanted to reach out to a staff person or one of our volunteer leaders to get a second opinion. Especially when you start texting, it is always good to ask for second opinions if you don't feel confident. And that is actually wonderful, because we welcome questions. You know, we want people to not only feel confident when they're engaging with voters, but we want you to know that not only are you engaging, but you have the full support and backing of all the collective experience of our volunteer leaders at your disposal, as well as our staff people. So you can always reach out to us with whatever questions you have. To do that, it's what I'll talk about a little bit later, but we do have a way of emailing in questions. So if it hasn't been shared already, it will be shared afterwards, but we have an email address called texting@openprogress.com. You can send in all of your email questions that you have when engaging with voters to that address. You can text them, so you can send an email saying like, hey, I got a response, you know, to the vote by mail question. Person said no, and then send some angry emojis. You know, what do you think I should do? Or if you're more tech savvy, you can send a screenshot of it. So, you know, taking a nice screenshot of the conversation and then attaching that to an email. It is entirely up to you how you want to best get your answer, but know that that is available and an option as well. I will also talk a little bit about how we utilize a program called Slack, which is also available if people would like to be added to it. For those of you who don't know, Slack is basically a contact application that allows people to engage in specific channels. And we do have a channel dedicated to just our vote.org programs that I can add people to if they'd like to create an account over there. But if that sounds like too many programs, you are welcome to just stay in text out and email us questions. that is the big takeaway I want from that, is that there are ways to get help if you need it, and choose the way that is easiest for you. So know that that is there. I'm going to go and metaphorically respond to this person by going with the ballot request no, because that's the response I think is best. There are two other things that I want to touch on here, and then I might be able to open it up to questions a little bit earlier than expected. I'm going to click on this conversation here because I am not sure how this got completed. But so let's say I get a response like this from somebody who says, you know, when they're responding to the question of will you sign up to vote by mail this year, they respond with no English, or maybe they respond in Spanish. Or let's say a person responds with a very specific voting question. Let's say I live in Gwinnett County, Georgia, and I was told that my county registrar's office is open till 9 p.m. on Fridays, but it closed at 7 p.m. when I went there. You know, who can I talk to about this? You know, there are going to be questions that we can't answer or conversations that we don't know how to respond to. And for that, I want to direct you to this reassign button up here. So for this one, you can always reassign conversations that are in different languages. We have a lot of volunteers who are versed in a variety of different languages. Primarily, we do have a number of staff who speak Spanish, but we also have a number of staff who speak a variety of other languages. So you can always reassign conversations and allow other people to be able to answer them and engage with people in hopefully their native tongue. To that scenario about the voting registrar's office in Gwinnett County, there's a reassign reason up here that says, you know, say voting info question not answered by responses. If you go through the search bar here and type in something like absentee, you'll see there's a lot of responses in here that have quite a bit of information, most of them linking back to the Georgia Secretary of State's office. So you're welcome to go through here and see if a response fits for what somebody's asking. But if you really don't know the answer or can't get it, you can reassign it. Most importantly is this conversation makes me uncomfortable. If at any point a voter says something to you that makes you uncomfortable or makes you not want to engage, you can always reassign this conversation, no questions asked. We want everybody to know that and feel confident they're protected and they do not have to engage with anybody that they do not want to. So in this case, I'm going to reassign that this conversation's in another language. It's going to ask me if I'm confirming that I want to reassign it, and I'm going to click yes, which you can see that conversation is now gone. And it is, at least on the back end, it is up here, and I can get to it and assign it to somebody. The next thing I want to point out is that there are quite a few responses in here, not all of which that are tied to the workflow. So if somebody asks a question like, I need to update my registration, you can type in, say, registration, and you can see a variety of different campaigns or responses to send that give people the opportunity to re-register. If someone is, say, you know, responds to the question of, would you like to vote by mail, with a response of like, I like tacos, there's a nonsense response. There's a lot of different things in here. If someone is driving, there's a driving response. There's quite a few different things in there to be able to respond to. And you can always search in here for different keywords or find different things that would be the most effective responses. Like I said, there's a lot of info in here. You don't have to know every one of them, but we want to make sure that it's available to everybody. The last thing I want to mention is this middle tab right here, which are called opt-outs. So unfortunately, you can't see any of them on the completed side, but an opt-out is somebody who asks to be removed from a texting list. So these are people who say things like stop number, don't text, unsubscribe, cease, you know, different things like that. That is totally okay. We are going to get people who want to be removed from lists. It's totally fine. If we get somebody who has to be removed, we don't want to debate them on it. We just want to go ahead and get them removed so that they don't get any more texts. You can see there's quite a few responses in here to send as well. So if someone says like, take me off your list, I don't live in Georgia, you just click on the opt out of state response. If someone says, say, I promise to vote, but remove me, I don't want these texts, there's a response. It's like opt out plus voter. Most of the time though, you're just going to get the response that says like, remove me, which you can just use this regular opt out for. If you're ever confused or ever want confirmation if you need to remove a voter or not, you can always double check with staff. But look for those keywords of like remove, don't text, in the same way that you think that you would respond, and just go with your gut on those. But always double check. We will include what's called our opt-out guide, which provides really good insight into how to handle these conversations. And always double check with staff if you're ever confused. But with that, I think I can wrap up a minute early and open it up to any questions that anyone has.
Yeah, thank you. That was really great, Chris. So we did have a few people who just needed a reminder about what the tripler was and the purpose that it serves.
Perfect. So tripling is analogous to, I would say, making a plan to vote. It's a psychological and sociological thing. I don't want to say tactic, but it's a way that people have tried to enhance voter turnout. So tripling, if you look at the what it says in the workflow. So the tripler ask is what you'll send to somebody when someone agrees to sign up to register to vote by mail. So the question starts off with, can you think of 3 friends who would also want to vote by mail? So it's kind of that goal of now putting that activism onto the voter that you've contacted and trying to get them to think of 3 friends that could sign up. And if they respond with a yes, we don't have to get their names in these campaigns. We just send that tripler yes response where we try to like get them to say them to us. We're not going to record them. We can't contact them. There's no other part of this other than trying to get that voter to think, who are 3 friends I can contact? Like I can think of my 3 housemates' names, like Caitlin, Steph, and Gabe. But like once you start getting that thought process of like, maybe I should help get them signed up to vote by mail, it's a cool way to kind of expand and enhance the franchise and enhance political participation. Much like in the same way that like, if I ask somebody, do you plan to vote in 2020? And they say yes, I can say great and walk away. But if I talk to them a little bit farther and it's like, okay, well, how do you plan to vote this year? And walking them through and making them visualize how they're going to vote. Like, oh, I'm going to vote early before I go to work because I want to skip all the lines. Or like, I want to vote by mail this year because, I am high risk for coronavirus. I plan on dropping my ballot off at my, county registrar's office like a couple days or a couple weeks before the election, things like that. So it's not something you ever have to know anything more about. It really is just a tool that we try to use to enhance and getting people to encourage more people to vote by mail.
Great, thank you. And then also, there were a few questions about when they request the text messages, just kind of going into that about where they're coming from, sending them out and what that's going to look like since they couldn't see it live.
Yeah, for sure. So the requests, the button to request text will be a big green request text button right in the area where I'm like making a geographic square with my mouse. It'd be directly above like the ready, flagged, and complete tabs over here on the left-hand side. Once you request text, those conversations and numbers are pre-generated and sent to you once they're approved. They'll come up with like initial to send. It'll have the contact's name, and then it'll have a big green button that'll basically have like a number that says like 300 texts to send. And then you'll click on each one of them individually to send them out. Those initial texts are exactly the same of what that, TextEdit didn't like that I did that. It'll look like the exact same as that initial message that was at the top of each of those conversations that we had before. That question of like, hello voter, I'm Chris. All voters in Georgia can vote by mail this year. I clicked on Pennsylvania this time. All voters can vote by mail this year. Will you join me in signing up to vote by mail? And you'll send those texts out individually by clicking on them to hit send. It is very fast. It is very easy to send out a large number of texts very quickly. And those numbers come to us from those contacts that vote.org has provided that fit either that young voter demographic or that demographic of voters of color. That's where those lists come from. And then when voters respond, they'll respond into your Ready tab.
Thank you. Also, so when we have voters that respond in a way that is partisan, maybe they identify a candidate that they plan on supporting, just kind of going through how we handle those since it's totally nonpartisan.
For sure. I'm going to see if I can click on some of these completed ones because I probably have at least one of these. So if somebody responds in a partisan way, none of our responses that we send back have a partisan bend. So there's nothing that we have to do in regards to that. I mean, half the time it kind of sounds like we're avoiding them. If we ever get somebody who just responds back with like who they're supporting, like if this voter responded back with saying like, I'm voting for Biden, thanks so much for what you're doing, or I'm voting for Trump, thanks for volunteering, et cetera, et cetera. I typically will send like the undecided response, but that's just because that's kind of what we decided is probably the best response to send here because it still gives them the option to vote by mail for the next election, or it gives them the option to, vote in person, whatever is easier for them. But you can always ask us for a second opinion of what response you think is best. But just because the voter wants to talk partisan, we're just going to stick to nonpartisan.
Great, thank you. And then, so there were some questions about when they request the text messages. Let's say they can't send the 300 or maybe they're having difficulty staying up on replies. What happens at that point?
Absolutely. So you don't have to send every text that you're assigned. Any text that you don't send out of that initial like 200, for example, will go back into the larger pool that another volunteer can request. That reassignment time, I think, is like 60 minutes. So don't worry if you think that you can't get through all of those. You can, if you leave them idle, they'll be reassigned automatically. Same thing goes for these conversations. As a best practice, we do encourage all volunteers to be prepared that if they request a batch of text to spend at least about 30 minutes, responding to conversations that come in rather quickly. Most conversations will come in within the first 30 minutes, but inevitably there might be some responses that come in later. We recommend that people check back at least, once in the day, a little bit later, and then at least once the next day, just to follow up on any outstanding replies. If for any reason you can't get to them, because unfortunately life does happen and people have many commitments, we totally understand that. Within 24 hours, if a conversation is not replied to, it will be automatically reassigned within the system so that another volunteer can pick it up. That's what that mark looks like here that says this message has been reassigned. And then another voter or another volunteer like myself is able to respond to them. We always make sure that we can still not ghost any of the voters that we talk to.
Thank you. And are we anticipating some register to vote type texting as we move closer to November to actually help people register?
So we're trying to figure out what vote.org's major initiatives are going to be. The ones so far have all been focused on vote by mail. I know they have something that they're working on right now but it hasn't really been shared to us what that major initiative is going to be. I do know that it is going to be rolled out to us starting tomorrow and into next week. On Monday, we'll know all the final details about what the program is going to be and who it's going to be reaching out to. I do know that anecdotally, it is harder and harder to register voters closer to the election, just because states have voting restrictions. Like, you know, I know in Ohio, for example, you have to be registered to vote at least 30 days before election day. So you'd have to be registered on, say, October 3rd in order to vote on November 3rd. Though a number of states do have programs like same day registration. I do know that it's harder the closer that elections get to doing voter registration. So a lot of what I think is going to focus around voting by mail, early voting access, or what's called ballot chasing, which is following up with voters who've requested absentee ballots to make sure that they don't have any questions about voting, and that they have a safe plan to return their ballot, either to mail it in before the election to ensure it gets counted, or to ensure that they're going to drop it off at their local county elections office. Those are the three that I anticipate being more active, but I can't rule out that there wouldn't be a register to vote, but it's really up to vote.org.
Thank you. And then we have, I think, about 1 more minute for one last question, and that's really just how everyone is going to know when we have the programs open and they can come join us for texting.
Jamie, I think it's almost even a you question too. If you want to go into detail about that.
Yeah, so, you know, of course, people are more than welcome to come in and look and see if they see that green open tab next to the program names. But I will absolutely be reaching out to Class Act and give them my volunteer activation email and let them know that we are ready and open for texting. And a little background on it, what state that we're doing, things like that, so that everyone is ready to go when it's time, which we are expecting some lists to come in and be green lighted for us next week.
A big shout out to Chris and to Jamie and Open Progress for making this volunteer opportunity available to us at Class Act. Truly a great class action.